The night seemed endless in the quiet town of Ravensworth. Beyond the iron gates, the Haraway estate loomed like a relic of wealth and power, its windows lit as though the house itself refused to sleep. But inside, silence reigned, except for the sharp, uneven breaths of a woman pacing across polished oak floors. Cecilia Haraway clutched the receiver in trembling hands, her voice low and strained as she spoke into the phone. "He hasn't come home," she whispered to the operator, her words breaking on the edge of panic. "It's been hours. This isn't like him." Her husband, Alistair Haraway, wealthy industrialist, patron of charities, and the man everyone in Ravensworth admired, had vanished. He was last seen leaving his private club in the city, his driver dismissed early, his whereabouts afterward swallowed by the night. Cecilia's words painted the outline of a devoted wife, terrified for her husband's safety. But even in her plea there was a hesitancy, a pause too long, as if she was rehearsing grief before wearing it. By dawn, the mansion gates became a stage for whispers. Neighbors craned their necks, reporters gathered with flashing cameras, and detectives arrived in measured steps. The perfect life the Haraways displayed to the world began to blur. "Are you certain he didn't mention where he was going?" Detective Rowan asked, his eyes fixed on Cecilia. She swallowed hard, avoiding his gaze. "No, nothing. He said he'd be home before midnight. He always comes home, always." But the word rang hollow in the cavernous hallway, echoing against oil-painted ancestors staring down with stern indifference. Behind the scenes, speculation spread like wildfire. Was Alistair kidnapped? Did he flee? Or had something darker happened behind those marble walls? As the night bled into another day, Ravensworth found itself entranced by the mystery. The town's golden man had vanished, leaving only his trembling wife and a mansion filled with questions. And somewhere, whether in shadow or soil, Alistair Haraway's truth waited to surface. The search for Alistair Haraway spread beyond the gates of Ravensworth. His name splashed across headlines, his photograph plastered on television screens. To the world, he was the embodiment of success, a man who had risen from modest beginnings to command industries, fund hospitals, and dine with ministers. A devoted husband, a loyal friend, benefactor of the forgotten. Neighbors recalled his charm. "Alistair never walked past without stopping to ask after your family," one elderly woman told the press. A former employee described him as the fairest man I ever worked for. To outsiders, he was untouchable, golden, flawless, untarnished by the stains of ordinary men. Yet within the gilded rooms of the Haraway mansion, the narrative faltered. Cecilia sat rigid in the drawing room during her first interview, the walls behind her lined with family portraits. In the photographs, Alistair's smile was dazzling, but the shadows in the frames seemed to creep around him. "Did your husband have enemies, Mrs. Haraway?" Detective Rowan pressed, his voice measured. Her eyes flickered to a portrait above the fireplace, Alistair at a charity gala, hand resting firmly on her shoulder. She hesitated, lips parting, then closing again. "No," she said at last. Everyone adored him, but her tone carried weight, as though she herself wasn't entirely convinced. Reporters later dissected the footage. Why did she pause? Why did her gaze linger too long on the portrait? Why did her words seem rehearsed? In Ravensworth, whispers turned colder. Perfect men do not vanish overnight. Perfect lives do not fracture in silence. Somewhere beneath the polished marble floors and manicured lawns, there had to be something more, an imperfection carefully hidden, waiting for light to expose it. And as the cameras focused on Cecilia's unreadable expression, the question deepened. Was Alistair Haraway truly the perfect husband? Or had his perfection been the most dangerous illusion of all? The gilded image of Alistair Haraway began to fracture, piece by piece, under the weight of whispered confessions. What had once been a tale of devotion and success shifted into darker corridors, where truth hid like rot beneath polished wood. Detectives widened their circle, questioning those who had orbited the Haraways' world of champagne galas and charity balls. At first, the stories aligned with the public narrative. Alistair, the charming patron, the attentive husband. But cracks emerged when former colleagues, friends, and quiet acquaintances began to talk. One spoke of late nights at the Coronet, a private club tucked behind Ravensworth's old theater. He wasn't alone. the man murmured, eyes darting away from Detective Rowan's steady gaze. Always with someone new. Women who didn't belong to this town. Another, a school friend named Oswin Calder, confessed more uneasily. He had affairs, yes. I never knew how many. But Cecilia, she must have known. Everyone else did. His hands shook as he signed his statement, as though betrayal had passed from Alistair's ghost straight into his conscience. The image of the flawless husband dissolved further, when staff from the estate revealed muffled arguments echoing through closed doors. Cecilia's voice sharp, Alistair's low and venomous. Yet when questioned, Cecilia's replies were rehearsed and fragile. I didn't know, she said, fingers twisting her wedding band. I didn't know about any of them. But her voice faltered, and the silence that followed her words was more telling than the words themselves. By now, the town was devouring every detail, each revelation feeding a hunger for scandal. The perfect man had become a stranger, a shadow stitched together with lies, and yet an unease lingered. If Alistair had betrayed so many, how many more carried grudges? How many had reason to wish him gone? As Detective Rowan left another interview, his thoughts circled a single truth. When a man's life is built on secrets, his disappearance rarely begins at the surface. Something deeper was waiting, and Cecilia Haraway's silence might hold the key. Cecilia Haraway's world appeared to collapse under the weight of the revelations. Yet those closest to her noticed something unsettling. Grief clung to her in fragmented pieces, tears when the cameras rolled, silence when no one watched. Some neighbors whispered that she looked hollow, consumed. Others, in hushed tones, remarked she seemed almost unburdened. Detectives watched her closely. At dinners where friends gathered in forced sympathy, she sat before untouched plates, her fork never rising. Her eyes drifted beyond the room, fixed on nothing, as though she were somewhere only she could see. When Detective Rowan invited her to the station for formal questioning, her composure fractured further. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, her hands trembled, clasped tightly in her lap. The detective's voice cut through the silence. Mrs. Haraway, you've given 3 different accounts of the night your husband disappeared. First, you said he left after dinner. Then you said you fell asleep before he returned from the city. And now, you say you don't remember? Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, suffocating. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she murmured, "It's all such a blur." Rowan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Or are you choosing not to remember? She flinched, her gaze dropping to the table's cold surface. Outside the room, officers exchanged wary glances. Every hesitation, every shifting detail, built suspicion like bricks in a wall. Was Cecilia concealing her husband's fate, or someone else's secret entirely? When she finally walked free from the station, the press swarmed her, flashbulbs exploding like gunfire. She didn't speak. She didn't defend. She didn't plead. She only stared ahead, pale and rigid, as though silence itself was her armor. But silence has weight, and for Detective Rowan it was the heaviest clue yet, because silence, he knew, was rarely empty. It was full of guilt, of secrets, of names never spoken aloud, and in Cecilia Haraway's silence, he was certain, lived the next step of the truth. Detective Rowan was not new to disappearances. In his 20 years of service, he had watched names fade into files, families break under silence, and faces stare forever from missing posters. But the Haraway case clung to him differently, like smoke that seeped beneath the skin. Back in his office, the walls became a shrine to Alistair Haraway. Photographs pinned in chaotic clusters, maps threaded with red string, transcripts scattered across the desk. In the half-light of a desk lamp, cigarette smoke curled upward, tracing shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Rowan barely slept, surviving on bitter coffee and the gnawing conviction that the truth was close, yet hidden. But it wasn't only Alistair he studied. It was Cecilia, her silence, her shifting memories, the way her grief looked staged, like an actress rehearsing lines she didn't believe. He replayed the footage of her interviews, pausing on the flicker in her eyes, the hesitation before her words. She knows more than she says, he muttered to himself, voice rough with exhaustion. She's protecting something, or someone. Colleagues warned him not to let it consume him. "Rowan," one officer cautioned, "you're digging into shadows. Careful, or you'll lose yourself in them." But Rowan ignored the warnings. Each hesitation from Cecilia, each crack in her voice pulled him deeper. He began to sense the case was not just about a missing man. It was about a marriage rotted from within, the union of secrets and power struggles that had finally snapped. At night, he dreamed of her sitting alone in the mansion, staring at portraits of a man who might never return. He would wake with the bitter certainty that her silence was not weakness but strategy. And yet, with every layer he peeled away, he found himself caught, not just in the mystery, but in her. Obsession blurred with suspicion, because the more Rowan searched for Alistair, the more he feared the true danger lay not in the vanished man, but in the woman left behind. The deeper Detective Rowan dug, the less Alistair Haraway resembled the man celebrated in glossy magazines and charity galas. The perfect husband, the generous philanthropist. These titles now felt like a mask hiding a far uglier truth. It began with a box, hidden in the back of the Haraway study. Wedged behind drawers of neatly filed business papers, Rowan uncovered a locked chest. Inside, brittle envelopes, faded photographs, and letters stained with age. They were not the keepsakes of a devoted family man, but the relics of broken lives. One letter, written in a woman's delicate hand, read like both confession and accusation. "You promised me a future, Alistair. You left me with nothing but ruin. One day it will return to you." Another photograph showed him younger, his arm around a woman, not Cecilia, his smile confident, almost cruel. Rowan traced the names and a forgotten scandal surfaced, buried decades earlier by money and influence. A failed business deal that bankrupted families. Affairs that ended in silence. Women discarded, men destroyed. None had ever spoken publicly, silenced by fear or settlement. But their resentment had not vanished. "People don't just forget," Rowan whispered as he laid the letters across his desk. "They wait." The detective began to imagine Alistair not as a victim, but as a man surrounded by shadows he himself had created. Enemies born of betrayal. Lovers turned into ghosts. Families torn apart by his ambition. Could one of them have come back to claim him? Or worse, had Alistair, knowing the past was closing in, orchestrated his own disappearance to escape the reckoning? Rowan's cigarette burned to ash between his fingers as the question tightened around him. For every polished photograph of Alistair Haraway, there was another, hidden, cruel, and violent. And Rowan knew that the ghosts of the past never stay buried, especially when they finally smell blood. The facade of the Haraway mansion cracked not with words but with evidence. What Rowan had long suspected finally surfaced under the sweep of forensic light. In the drawing room, beneath the velvet drapes and polished oak, tiny shards of glass glittered like frozen tears. A window had been broken, but not from the outside. The fractures radiated inward, a sign of violence contained within these walls. Then came the darker discovery. Traces of blood, minute but undeniable, staining the edge of the Persian rug. DNA confirmed it was Alistair's. The house that had once hosted galas and laughter now whispered of struggle, silence, and fear. Rowan sat across from Cecilia once more, her pale face illuminated by the harsh bulbs of the interrogation room. The evidence lay between them. Photographs of shattered glass, a swab of blood. The marriage laid bare in forensic fragments. "You said you went to bed early that night," Rowan pressed, his voice low, deliberate. "But the evidence tells us there was a struggle. Your husband bled here in your home. Why didn't you tell us?" Cecilia's hands trembled in her lap. She shook her head, eyes brimming with unshed tears. I couldn't." "Couldn't what?" Rowan leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the table. Her lips quivered and the silence stretched until it nearly broke. Finally, her voice emerged, a broken whisper. "You don't understand. He wasn't the man you think he was." Rowan's chest tightened. He wanted her to go on, to confess, to release the weight she carried. But instead, Cecilia collapsed into sobs, her body shaking with something deeper than grief. Fear. The officers watching from behind the glass exchanged uneasy glances. Was this guilt or survival? Rowan knew the case was no longer a matter of a missing man. It was a house soaked in secrets, a marriage that bore scars invisible to the public. And as Cecilia's tears stained the interrogation table, Rowan felt the truth circling closer, sharp as the glass shards that had betrayed her silence. But the most dangerous secret, he sensed, had not yet been spoken. For weeks, the Haraway case had circled shadows, every clue leading Rowan closer, but never granting him the truth. Yet the breakthrough came not from the mansion, but from the bank ledgers Alistair had left behind. An intricate trail of withdrawals, shell accounts and transfers hidden in plain sight. Alistair Haraway had not been taken. He had walked away. Rowan traced the money to a safe deposit box under a false name. Inside, he found a suitcase, stuffed with crisp banknotes, forged passports, and a single photograph of Cecilia, her face slashed through with ink. The realization struck like a blade. Alistair had orchestrated his own disappearance, slipping into the night with the precision of a man long preparing for escape. His empire was crumbling, his secrets bleeding into daylight, and he had chosen to vanish rather than be destroyed. But the suitcase revealed something darker. The signatures on the documents, the timing of the withdrawals. This had not been done alone. Someone had helped him. Rowan's mind returned to Cecilia's whispered words. "You don't understand." He wasn't the man you think he was. Had she been his accomplice? Or his enemy left behind as punishment? The evidence twisted like a knife, pointing in all directions yet resolving to none. At dawn, Rowan stood before the Haraway estate one final time. The mansion loomed in silence, its windows reflecting the pale light of morning. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the cold air, and stared at the place where the story had begun. Alistair Haraway was gone, whether alive in some distant city or buried beneath the weight of his own lies. No one could say. What remained was a hollow marriage, a grieving wife wrapped in suspicion, and a trail of secrets that ended in silence. And then came the question that haunted Rowan more than any evidence. Someone had helped Alistair disappear, and that someone was still free. As the screen of his mind darkened, Rowan knew the story wasn't finished. Justice in Ravensworth was not a verdict. It was a ghost, always present, never satisfied. The truth had escaped, and perhaps so had the devil.